Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the vlog, episode 38. Today's intro, not from the studio, it's not from the car either, but rather, it's from my brand new home. If you've followed this channel at all for the last couple months, you know my wife and I have been shopping for a house. You also know it's been a super competitive market that we have really struggled in, and somehow we luckboxed our way into a beautiful home about 35 miles outside of Orlando in a town called Eustis, Florida. It's a beautiful home. We've put a lot of sweat equity into preparing the master bedroom as well as my daughter's bedroom, and I've put a lot of time in the landscaping as well. And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but it's nice to finally have a place to call home. So, pros and cons of raking your yard. Pro, the yard starts to look really good. Con, it's tough as shit, and it reveals just how much of your grass might be dead. Part of shopping for a house and buying a house and everything means I haven't had a whole lot of time for cards. I've only played cards, I think, 3 times in the year 2022. I don't see myself getting to play again anytime soon. So I've got today's episode to put out. I have another episode, episode 39, that I'll put out here in about a week or so. And then the channel is going to go on a little bit of a hiatus. I'm in the last 9 weeks of school, and it's always the toughest. There's no teacher work days, there's no student holidays, it's just 9 straight weeks of work. But then summer comes, and I get a little bit of time off, and that's when I plan on picking things back up on this channel. So today's episode is actually a combination of 2 short sessions that I played at Orange City. In the first session, I tried to give myself a challenge to see how much money I can make in a 3-hour period. As you'll see from the video, I got off to a really slow start. In the second session, again, I only had about 3 hours to play, so I wanted to see how I could do. There's plenty of premiums to watch. If you enjoy, like, subscribe, comment. Let's get to it. We're about 75 minutes in. We're down about $70. It's just been a bunch of raising pre-flop and then totally whiffing flops and kind of blinding away. We finally have a good one here. We're under the gun and we look down at pocket queens. I'm going to open the action for $12. Folds all the way to the button who makes the call. And then it folds all the way around to the big blind, Diego from the last episode. He also calls, so we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is ace-6-8 with 2 hearts, so not a great flop here for me. But I can't just check. I've got to at least put a c-bet out and figure out where I'm at, so I c-bet for $20. The button makes the call, but Diego in the big blind folds, so we're off to a turn heads up. The turn is another 8, so it pairs the board. I don't necessarily think it's a bad card, but again, not a great card either. I check my action, and the button actually checks behind, so we're off to the river. The river is a 5, and it's interesting because the heart draw bricked out. I've got to put a bet out here in case I'm up against a heart draw, so I bet out for $45. He calls pretty quickly, and he flips over ace-9. We're in +2 this time, and we look down at ace-jack offsuit. Under the gun opens the action for $10. When the action gets to me, I actually consider a 3-bet, but I decide to go ahead and just call and respect his under the gun opening range. The cutoff and the big blind call as well, so we're off to a flop 4 ways. The flop is ace-king-4 rainbow, so I flop top pair here. It checks over to me, and I bet out for $25. The cutoff then raises all in to $55. With the action folding back to me, I'm obviously going to call here, and I do. The turn, a blank. The river, a jack, so I announce 2 pair and show, and my opponent shows me ace-4, and so we win here. Kind of gross. At the time he showed it to me, I didn't realize he had flopped 2 pair, and I actually got lucky on the river, so sorry, buddy. In a hand that's full of mistakes, we're straddling from the button, and we look down at king-8 offsuit. The small blind, +1, the hijack, and the cutoff all call. When the action gets to me, it's a perfect time for a squeeze, but I opt to check. We're off to a flop multi-way. The flop is king-7 blank, so not a terrible flop. The small blind bets out for $5. It folds all the way around to me, and I decide to go ahead and just call and see what develops. The turn is another king, so now we have trips. My opponent checks to me, and I decide to go ahead and check behind for a little bit of deception. The river is a 7 of spades, so it pairs the board. So now if I was up against another king, we're going to be chopping here. But if I was up against a draw, I should be in pretty good shape. The small blind leads out for $30, and so when the action's on me, I'm going to bump it up in case I was against that flush draw, and I raise to $110. He snaps me off. He shows king-3, so the board pairing was probably the worst thing that could have happened. Take a look at the stats. I wasn't necessarily a huge favorite at the turn, but I probably should have bet there to protect my equity. We're in the cutoff this time, and we look down at 5-6 offsuit. There's a call from +1, and it folds all the way around to the hijack who calls. When the action gets to me, I go ahead and make the call as well. Then the button raises to $6. The big blind calls, then all of the limpers also call, so we're off to a flop 4 ways. The flop is 5-5 deuce, so we flop trips here. It checks to me and I put a bet out of $22. We see a call from the button, the big blind folds, +1 then calls, and everybody else folds, so we're off to a turn 3 ways. The turn is a jack of spades, so it's a pretty safe card here. It checks to me and I continue to fire and I bet out for $60. I'm trying to give someone a decent price, about 2.5 to 1 to call if they have a flush draw. However, the button folds and then +1 folds as well. The very next hand, there's a button straddle. We're in the hijack and we look down at ace-king offsuit. It folds all the way around to Diego on the low jack, who bumps it up to $15. When the action's on me, I put the 3-bet in and I raise to $55. And everybody ends up folding. I played one more orbit and then my 3-hour time limit was approaching, and believe it or not, I was actually down about $150 at one point and got my stack all the way to 247. I lost the very last hand I played when I called a raise with king jack and didn't hit anything on the flop, but I'm going to book a really small win here on a day where I thought it was going to be a big loss. We're back just a couple days later and we're going to put in another short session here. The first hand in, there's a button straddle. We're in +2 and we look down at queen 10 offsuit. I didn't really notice what was going on because I was getting everything set up and that there was actually a straddle on. So when the action gets to me, I put in a raise to $10.
Oh, the straddle? Oh, it's a smart raise.
Oops. The button and the small blind both call my pathetic raise, so we're off to the flop 3 ways. The flop is pretty good. It's queen high. The small blind checks, I decide to check, and the button checks behind, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a 7, shouldn't really change too much of anything. It checks to me, and I decide to go ahead and throw a bet of $15 out, and they both fold, so we win the first one. The very next hand, we're in +1, and we look down at ace-king offsuit. It folds to me, and I bump it up to $12. I get no respect, as +2, the low jack, the hijack, the button, the small blind, and the big blind all make the call.
Well, I can tell this table respects me.
We're going off to a flop like 100 ways. The flop is queen high, so I don't connect here. It checks around to the hijack, who clearly seems to be the action player and the quote-unquote pro at the table, and he puts a bet out, but it's only $12. It's just a really strange size, only 1/6 of the pot. He seems like a smart enough player to do this, to induce a raise and then come back over the top. He gets one call, and when the action gets to me, I decide with my 2 overs and backdoor straight draws, I go ahead and make the call. He gets 2 other callers, so we're off to a turn 4 ways. The turn is a 7 of diamonds, so it really shouldn't change a whole lot. Once again, it checks to the hijack, who bets $40, another smaller bet. So I ask, what would you guys do here? The hijack has me covered by a lot, so I don't think a raise is going to push him off at this point. Let me know in the comments what you would do. I end up making the fold, as does everybody else, and he wins. We are straddling from the button, and we look down at ace-king of spades. We see calls from the small blind, the big blind, under the gun, and the hijack, so when the action gets to me, I put in the squeeze to $30. The small blind calls, and then it folds all the way back around to the hijack, who shoves for $112 total. This is a great spot. I decide to go ahead and reshove as the small blind appears to have me covered. The small blind's considering a call, but he ends up folding, so we're heads up. My opponent has pocket queen, so it's a traditional race here. I don't connect on the flop, but the turn is a king, and the river is an unnecessary ace, giving me 2 pair. We're straddling from the button again. This time we look down at 10-6 offsuit. We see calls from the small blind, the big blind, under the gun, and the cutoff, so this is another squeeze opportunity, and a good poker player would probably squeeze with marginal hands and not just as great hands, but I opt to just make the check here. We're off to the flop. The flop is 9-9-10, so I've cut a little piece here. It checks to me, and I put a bet of $15 out. The big blind pro and under the gun both make the call, so we're off to a turn 3 ways. The turn is a 2 of diamonds, and it checks around to under the gun, who bets $45. For some reason, I feel I'm beat here, and I actually end up making what might be kind of considered a tight fold. The big blind folds as well, and I'll let you listen.
Show the bluff.
I don't bluff, and I don't show when I lie. I don't lie, and I don't show when I lie.
Got a visit from a vlog watcher named Mark while I was out there. Said he's really enjoying the content that I'm putting out, so thank you for the support, sir. We're in the big blind this time, and we look down at king 10 of clubs. +1 opens the action for $5. We see calls from +2, the low jack, and the button, so when the action's on me, I bump it up to $25. and everybody folds. We're in the big blind again. This time we'll try it with pocket eights. There are limps from +1 and +2, and it folds all the way around to the button, who raises to $7. The small blind then calls, and when the action's on me, I bump it up to $25. And everybody folds.
Pocket pair action.
The very next hand, we're in the small blind, and we look down at a channel favorite, Jack-8 offsuit. We see calls from +2 and the button. I go ahead and make the call from the small blind, and the big blind checks. We're off to a flop 4 ways. Flop's not bad. It's 8 high, so I've caught top pair here. It checks around to +2, who puts a bet of $10 out. I'm his only caller, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a king, so it's not a great card. I check, and my opponent checks behind, so we'll see a river for free. The river is a deuce, and so I decide here I'm probably good, and I bet out for $15. My opponent's been aggressive all day and calling people off with ace high, so maybe I can squeak out a tiny bit of value here. My opponent does call, and he shows king 10. Just one of those spots where I guess he actually had it, though he had to pay to get there. In the final hand of the night, we're in the hijack, and we look down at queen 10 offsuit. We see a call from under the gun, and it folds all the way around to me, and I bump it up to $12. The cutoff folds, but the button calls. The small blind and big blinds both fold, but under the gun calls, so we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is 9-10 king with 2 hearts, so I've caught middle pair and a gut shot straight draw. It checks to me, and I put out a c-bet of $20. The button is my only caller, so we're off to the turn. The turn is a blank. It's a deuce of spades. I decide to go ahead and slow down here and check, and the button checks behind, so we'll see the river for free. The river is a 9, so it pairs the board. I check it over to him, and he throws a bet of $30 out. Obviously, he can have a king here, but he can also have a missed heart draw or maybe a 10 and we're perhaps chopping. I decide to go ahead and make the call, and he shows queen jack for the flop straight. Just awful. Feeling the tilt sinking in of starting so hot and going card dead, I decide to go ahead and wrap it up and call it a day. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more poker content. And you can follow me on Instagram at 7cardflushpoker.